In the year 1996, in the country of Japan, a revolutionary video game was released, an industry trailblazer that has since inspired decades of imitators. I'm of course referring to Super Mario 64, the game that introduced the 3D platformer to the masses. What's that? I've got the wrong script? Oh, whoops. That's embarrassing. I'm of course referring to Parappa the Rapper, an experiment in tying button inputs to music that led to the eventual reign of Guitar Hero and similar rhythm games. Huh? That's still not the right game? What video am I even recording anyway? Oh, Resident Evil, or Biohazard if you're feeling fancy. Can we start over? How many games can claim to have invented a genuinely new genre of play, one that has stood the test of time for 30 years? Despite 1996's track record, I assure you the answer is very few. Resident Evil can rightfully be called the pioneer of survival horror. Yes, it built upon the framework of earlier progenitors, chiefly 1989's Sweet Home and 1992's Alone in the Dark. But if you had to identify a single seed that sprouted such a widespread video game genus, no other game can compete with the tremendous influence of the original Resident Evil. Not only did it birth one of the industry's most successful and longest-running franchises, still topping the charts with its newest 2026 entry, but Resident Evil also deserves credit for laying the groundwork for countless sister series. I'm talking Silent Hill, Dead Space, Fatal Frame, The Evil Within, and even a recent wave of indie throwbacks like Signalis and Crow Country. Any other developer would be thrilled with such a roaring success, but not now legendary auteur Shinji Mikami. After overseeing the rapid development of several sequels for the PlayStation and Sega Dreamcast, Mikami proposed a remake of his own original title to the higher-ups at Capcom. With his mind racing over the exciting possibilities Nintendo's GameCube and its generational advancements offered, suddenly Resident Evil 1 felt downright quaint. The very premise must have sounded like the recipe for an indulgent disaster, but nevertheless Mikami did find his way back into the director's chair. In 2002, on the original title's 6-year anniversary, his intense perfectionism was ultimately vindicated on the world stage. Resident Evil REmake is an incredible work of art, an absolute triumph of game design that actually does manage to eclipse the original version of Mikami's masterpiece. Okay, let's cool off for a minute. That was a lot of superlatives. It's time we start to back up all that hype so you aren't just trusting the words of an internet stranger. Oh, I'm Austin, by the way. And if you're enjoying the video, I'd be thrilled if you'd subscribe for more like it. Anyway, in this Resident Evil and REmake retrospective review, I've identified the 3 core tentpoles of design that Mikami and his team expertly commanded to craft a singular something that has captured many millions of players. A masterpiece was born through absolute mastery of atmosphere, tension, and level design. Join me please as we analyze how the original Resident Evil pioneered the survival horror genre, and then how that grand vision was perfected with its equally legendary remake. Even if you haven't played Resident Evil yet, I still think you'll find some value here, so keep that butt seated. In that case, however, I do feel obligated to set the scene for you up front, so this all makes sense. RE veterans might appreciate a brief refresher too. The game opens with the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, STARS for short, sending in their Bravo team to investigate a series of mysterious deaths in the Arklay Mountains. Once the Bravo team goes MIA, STARS Alpha embarks on a rescue mission for their missing comrades. Almost immediately they find themselves under attack by mutant dogs, and the 4 survivors take refuge in the abandoned Spencer Mansion. We're given the option to play as either Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield, but the story plays out similarly, albeit with minor role swapping regardless of the choice. Chris is joined by Bravo team survivor and medic Rebecca Chambers to rescue Jill, whereas those who play as Jill are joined by Alpha's Heavy, Barry Burton, with Chris relegated to a damsel in distress. What doesn't change is STARS leader Albert Wesker's betrayal and surprise villainous turn, which shouldn't really come as a surprise. I mean, look at the guy. Before long, this simple premise leads us to a whole secret bioweapon engineering lab hidden underneath the Spencer Mansion, where the viral outbreak originated. This is cliché stuff, but I'd actually recommend the unexpectedly solid novelization I read in preparation for this video. It was a fun page-turner that did an admirable job fleshing out the game's paper-thin heroes and the Umbrella conspiracy. Story doesn't figure into my 3 pillars of design at all. However, I do want to comment on the low-budget B-movie charm. The game opens with a live-action sequence home to literally the worst acting you've ever seen, before transitioning to a Street Fighter-style cast spotlight. It's objectively awful, and yet oddly endearing. The developers reportedly cast random English-speaking actors off the street, unaware of how awkward the performances sounded to native ears. And I wouldn't have it any other way. An American horror movie filtered through foreign eyes makes for such a charming happy accident. Resident Evil wouldn't be the same without its Master of Unlocking and Jill sandwiches.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
There are too many iconic lines to count. For me, this is the one area where the original still bests the remake, which attempts to take itself more seriously and tone down the cheese. The voice acting is much more professional to its credit, but it's still not winning any awards. If I'm given the choice between inoffensively bland and delightfully terrible, it's not even a decision.
Oh, I almost forgot. It's a lockpick. You'd make better use of it.
At its heart, Resident Evil was always meant to evoke its cinematic zombie inspirations, so why not lean into that campy appeal?
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the Master of Unlocking, take it with you.
Thanks. Maybe I'll need it.
It makes for a fun dichotomy anyway, where one element of the game is pure schlock, but is surrounded by otherwise industry-leading artistic direction. And that brings me to Resident Evil's peerless atmosphere. Now, what do I mean by atmosphere? It's easy to identify strong atmosphere in a game, but as an abstract concept, it can be a bit difficult to define. I'd describe it as a game's ability to immerse the player and maintain a desired emotional state. Admittedly, that sounds overly textbook even to me. It might be helpful to just think in terms of vibes. And in the case of Resident Evil 1, the vibes are off the charts. The game makes countless intentional aesthetic choices to coax the player into the right headspace for the experience to be most immersive and affecting. The most obvious atmospheric technique the game employs is the somewhat controversial fixed camera angles. Have you ever heard the phrase, limitation breeds creativity? Well, Mikami and his team are living proof of that old adage's veracity. Believe it or not, the original plan was to put the player behind a first-person viewpoint. You can even see the remnants of this idea in the infamous door-opening loading screens. These were an admirable attempt to transform a hardware necessity into a thematic device, but I hope you'll forgive me for using modern computing power to skip through them. Their original intent was to immerse the player in the play space, but I think even players of the day would agree that seamless navigation is a far more effective approach toward that end goal. The Resident Evil series would eventually come full circle back to this proposed first-person vantage in 2017's soft reboot. But back in 1996, Mikami wasn't satisfied with the PlayStation's ability to render his vision. So why the switch to the fixed camera that's become synonymous with the original trilogy? Quite simply, a fixed camera allows the game to cheat, tricking the player's eyes with forced perspective. If a particular room is only ever going to be seen from one or two preset viewpoints, real-time rendering is just a waste of resources. By working smarter, not harder, the environmental artists instead simply illustrated a collection of static backdrops that require very little resources to cycle in and out. Polygons weren't cheap back in 1996. That extra headroom is then harnessed to render the dynamic player and enemy models with more detail and finesse than other contemporary games. It may not look the part today, but Resident Evil was a serious graphical showcase amongst its peers. While the models and backgrounds certainly have aged, what remains impressive is the cinematic artistry behind the camera placement. What began as a compromise turned into an incredible opportunity for creative expression. Careful composition of each shot subtly works to establish a particular mood without the player even realizing it. In cinema, this is known as mise en scène, but I can't help but feel insufferably pretentious saying that out loud. Nevertheless, let's turn our film school brain on and consider this shot of the locked doorway to the game's first boss fight. The diagonals of the hallway all direct your attention to this door in the center of the frame. What would otherwise present as just a typical closed door takes on an intimidating, threatening aura thanks to the camera's low vantage point. Fresh blood spatter highlighted by the lamp's glow confirms that something monstrous lies in wait behind this door. The average player is unlikely to pick up on all these techniques, but their effect is felt regardless. Here's another example, the entrance to the secret underground umbrella laboratory. The top-down view makes the player feel small and insignificant, almost like they're being sucked into the dark void that dominates the frame. This vantage with those heavy shadows makes the chasm feel infinitely deep. The feeling of dread at leaving the familiar to enter the unknown, where Umbrella's darkest horrors will be revealed, is overwhelming. I particularly love the wide shots of the dining room's first and second floor. This room is part of the player's first introduction to the Spencer mansion, and the framing choices here really sell the overwhelming scale of the mansion, while also helping the players orient themselves in the play space. The inherent benefits of a fixed camera are so powerful that REmake continues to utilize them. This was no longer a hardware necessity, but a choice freely made. Real-time rendering was fully on the table, but the developers believe that sticking to the classic formula yielded a superior experience. The results speak for themselves. Once again, players are treated to some of the most striking visuals of the generation it was released to. The set dressing, lighting, and level of detail remain incredible to this day. With this new coat of paint and the same cinematic flair, REmake straight up looks like a playable horror movie. It's worth noting that both Resident Evils totally forgo HUD elements. It can be easy to forget you're even playing a game at these heights of immersion. Shout out to this winding path to the new forest cabin. It feels as though unseen horrors are creeping just out of sight. The way the camera rapidly transitions between viewpoints forces the player to continually monitor for hidden threats shrouded by trees and fog. It perfectly evokes the frantic feeling I'd get as a kid out in the woods once the sun goes down. Close-ups are much more effective with more expressive models for Jill and Chris. Shots like this help put the player into their shoes. I also love how the game isn't afraid to pick strange angles that stray far from optimal visibility. The unfamiliarity and alienness of such framing really ingrain them in my memory. It's tempting to fall into the trap of reading subtext where none was ever intended, but I concede that sometimes there is no deeper hidden meaning. The curtains are just blue, and shots like this just look fantastic. Audio is equally as strong a sensory tool for eliciting emotion, and Resident Evil is a master in this department as well. Anyone who's played one of these games will instantly recall the soothing effects of the safe room theme. Here, players are granted a much-needed reprieve from the horrors outside, and allowed to finally take a breath and loosen up their tense muscles. This melody feels like a warm embrace to the desperate player, and after a few hours takes on a Pavlovian effect. Hearing these notes, even outside the game, is all it takes to trigger a sense of relief and peace. That's the power of good music. Tracks like Rebecca's theme have such a nostalgic air to them, even though I didn't play Resident Evil until my adult years.
It's pretty dangerous outside. Let me take care of it.
I understand. For now, I'll wait here.
It's a simple sequence of notes, nothing fancy, but there is just something magical about them that really connects with me. Listening to something like the guardhouse basement track transports me right back to the moment where it plays. I can't help but visualize the beach sharks flopping around. The audio and visuals coalesce into a memorable moment, greater than the sum of its parts, that becomes imprinted in your mind. I won't linger on this subject. I'm way out of my element discussing music, but I can recognize beautiful compositions when I hear them, and Resident Evil features more than its fair share. This music comes across so strongly because it is used so sparingly. The majority of your time spent exploring is accompanied only by chilling ambience. Echoing footsteps, creaking floorboards, leaves rustling in a breeze, wolves howling in the night. These sounds are incredibly effective at immersing the player into the game world. Outside of brief interactions with fellow STARS members, the player explores in complete isolation. Modern games often feel the need to fill the silence with verbal reactions or hint dialogue, but Resident Evil's protagonists explore in silence, leaving the player free to soak up the atmosphere and more fully lose themselves in the experience. These sound cues are usually relegated to the background or lost in the mix, but Resident Evil puts them front and center without any distractions. After all, sometimes silence is the most powerful sound. And when that music does kick in, you pay attention. The sudden shift only magnifies its impact. In that same sense, the game is quite restrained in regards to its horror. Newcomers might expect Resident Evil to be a non-stop splatterfest like the Grindhouse pictures that inspired it, but that's really not the case at all. Mikami and his team understood that, psychologically, the threat of an outcome is often a more potent agent of fear than the outcome itself. During extended periods of quiet, the imagination is given room to run wild with hypothetical possibilities. There's no telling what lies behind each closed door, so inevitably players brace for the worst. This is how the game keeps players on edge, with sustained tension rather than cheap scares. Just about every gameplay design decision seems to be in pursuit of instilling an unrelenting, anxious stress in the player, and it's incredibly effective. Of course, it would be dishonest to act as though Resident Evil doesn't also engage in traditional horror. These anticipated fears need to actualize at some point for the effect to persist. The infamous dog attack is probably the most famous jump scare in the series, but even this scripted event is in service of getting the player in that desired headspace. In the original Resident Evil, it's a traumatizing encounter. The Cerberus enemies are a new threat, and players have been woefully prepared for their aggression. This sequence, positioned at the very beginning of the game, is instrumental in properly setting expectations for what is to come. Monsters can and will suddenly appear without any warning. A quiet moment can never be trusted. The remake repurposes the event, but once again it is in service of building tension. Veteran players will enter this hallway with confidence, their knowledge of the PlayStation original preparing them for what is about to occur. Except there is no ambush this time, or the next time, or the time after that. With every trek down this hallway, these players will be expecting the jump scare, but Remake is patient indeed, waiting hours for their guard to finally drop before unleashing the hounds. By cleverly subverting expectations, Remake gets to have its cake and eat it too. It manages to repeatedly cultivate tension while still retaining the original surprise with the much delayed jump scare. All these monster attacks are only scary because the player character is so vulnerable. Zombies may move slowly, but they're also hardy little buggers, taking almost an entire clip to down with your starting handgun. Our character is unable to move while firing, so zombie encounters often resolve through a tense standoff, where you're just unloading into the shambling monster in hopes that it drops before reaching you. Faster enemies like the hunters are that much more terrifying. If luck isn't on your side and you do get caught by a monster, you'll find Chris and especially Jill to be much less resilient. A few bites is all it takes to bring your health down into the danger zone. Do not let yourself get grabbed. Among Remake's best additions is the Crimson Head, a new enemy type. This evolution of the basic zombie is far more aggressive and dangerous, but only appears under certain conditions. When a zombie is downed, its corpse now remains even after you reload the room. This is a neat memento, but mechanically you should think of these as potential Crimson Head spawn points. Defeating a zombie, what is ostensibly a victory, is now twisted into a ticking time bomb. If left alone, a zombie corpse has the chance to revive. Harder, better, faster, and stronger. So how can you prevent this from occurring? As always, Resident Evil seizes the opportunity to ratchet up the tension. Kerosene and a lighter can be used to burn the bodies before they revive, but this can only be done a finite number of times, and requires players to give up extra ammo or healing to carry the prerequisites on their person. Alternatively, Crimson Heads require the zombies', head to be left intact. While their heads can be popped with a lucky Beretta critical hit, the only reliable method involves a close-range shotgun slug to the skull. I shouldn't have to explain why intentionally allowing a zombie within arm's reach has me sweating bullets. You could attempt to sidestep the zombie's clumsy advance, but this is easier said than done. Player movement is also a bit ungainly due to what players have both affectionately and bitterly dubbed tank controls. Modern gamers have been conditioned to use the cardinal directions of a D-pad or control stick to move their avatar in the corresponding direction relative to the camera. If you press left, your character will move towards whatever is on the left side of the screen. This seems intuitive, but is completely incompatible with Resident Evil's shifting camera perspectives. Each time the camera swaps, the target destination also changes in its relative location on the television screen. Imagine the necessary inputs to traverse even a simple path like this. It would be quite disorienting. The solution is to make the controls independent of the camera perspective, instead tying them to your avatar's current orientation. The up button will always make Chris walk forward in the direction he is facing, regardless of the camera angle. Down always makes him back up, and left and right are used to turn. Instead of strafing, it's more of a swivel. You can see how the term tank controls caught on. Movement is very stiff and can feel like operating a piece of machinery. Don't get me wrong, this is the best control method for the classic Resident Evil games. There's no debating that. But I will admit that there is a bit of a learning curve in spatial reasoning. That being said, please don't let it be a barrier to entry. These games are absolutely worth overcoming that hurdle. I promise it's not that bad. Love them or hate them, it's a fact that tank controls aren't conducive to any sort of nimble footwork. Dodging around zombies in cramped quarters is a skill unto itself and should not be taken lightly. Those that do master the agile art of bobbing and weaving through enemies will be handsomely rewarded, however. Health packs and ammo are extremely scarce, and every encounter you avoid contributes to an indispensable stockpile for the greater threats to come. This is a delicate balancing act. Too little ammo risks frustrating the player, but too much and the tension just dissipates. Combat itself is very simple with a low skill ceiling. Most versions even include a generous auto-aim. The real skill is in managing such limited resources. Even if you never waste a single bullet, there simply isn't enough ammo to clear every enemy. You have to pick your battles carefully. With each monster that approaches you, there needs to be a split-second decision. Is it worth depleting your ammo resources to secure safe passage? If not, you have to understand that you're putting your health on the line, and healing is in just as short supply as ammo. Even such a foundational mechanic as saving your game can't be taken for granted. In a genius twist, saving can only be done at typewriters within the safe rooms, and require the use of an ink ribbon item. Players are afforded a finite number of saves, so each one has to count. When all three of these reserves run dry, the tension ramps to a feverish degree. All too often I found myself staggering through a new environment at critical health with nothing but an empty clip and no clear memory of my last save. The fear of losing progress is just as real as any snake, shark, or spider phobia. Or rather, arachnophobia. I actually know the word for that one. The bosses are a fun inclusion, but they also tend to disrupt the careful resource balance that the rest of the game maintains. The issue is inherent to the very concept of a mandatory encounter. Players can all too easily soft-lock themselves if too much ammo is wasted on fodder enemies. To their credit, the designers have partially accounted for this with a variety of safeguards. For one, some bosses can simply be skipped. Black Tiger, as well as the first run-in with Yawn, both allow players to get in and get out without firing a single shot. In other situations where the boss must be defeated to progress, the combat knife is always available as a last resort. This melee weapon can be finicky and frustrating in my opinion, but I do appreciate the potential challenge runs it allows for. Between the various in-game difficulty modifiers and self-imposed time limits or handicaps, the Resident Evil games are extremely replayable. The best boss fights allow for multiple approaches, which naturally allow for resource-starved players to still claim the satisfaction of defeating the boss. Those that lack the firepower can instead rely on brain power, and often end up with the more satisfying experience. Take the Plant 42 fight as an example. The V-Jolt herbicide can be created through an optional logic puzzle, and used to neuter the otherwise intimidating Flora. Neptune takes this approach even further by revolving entirely around a puzzle. After figuring out the proper steps to drain her pool, You're then rewarded with the satisfaction of frying the beached great white. Good stuff. Of course, logic puzzles aren't unique to the boss fights. They're an integral component of the classic Resi games. Along with a bevy of literal keys, various key items are required to solve gateway puzzles and delve deeper into each level. All these progression items eat into your intentionally cramped carrying capacity, which must also fit everything from the weapons themselves and their ammo, to healing and saving contingencies. On one hand, I dislike how much of the playtime is spent in menus. It distracts and disconnects from the otherwise immaculate immersive quality of the game. Case in point, the item menu allows you to pause in the middle of a tense standoff to reload your gun for free. This feels like a major oversight that removes potential depth from combat. However, I do appreciate how inventory management brings a secondary balancing lever for the developers to manipulate in building tension. It matters very little if a seasoned player has hundreds of bullets back in storage, if he doesn't have any on his person when a hunter suddenly attacks. Whenever I venture forth from the safe room, I'm incentivized to take no more than the bare essentials, leaving space for essential key items and any incidentals I find along the way. If the macro resource scarcity isn't enough to make the players sweat, the micro moment-to-moment inventory management can pick up the slack and prevent them from ever feeling truly comfortable. The option of which character to play as, Jill or Chris, is more than a cosmetic choice. You might suspect this to be a simple, one for the guys and one for the girls, but it's actually more akin to a difficulty select. As alluded to earlier, Chris is tougher than Jill and can take more hits, about 50% more. So Chris is easy mode and Jill is hard mode? Not so fast. Jill is compensated with 2 additional inventory slots, 8 versus Chris's 6. What's more, as the master of unlocking, she carries a lockpick kit that doesn't count against inventory limits and completely removes the need to find and carry old keys. She faces fewer enemies than Chris, has earlier access to stronger weapons, and even gets an exclusive and extremely potent bazooka with extra ammo pickups. Not to mention a more helpful companion character in Barry. No offense to all the Rebecca fans out there, where would Chris be without her? The Japanese release explicitly labeled Jill as easy mode and Chris as hard mode. I think it was a mistake omitting this information for the international release. These character differences are a creative difficulty modifier, but they don't serve that purpose if players don't know what they're signing up for. Taken all together, Jill's suite of assists disrupt the careful balance of Resident Evil. Great for a newbie's first playthrough maybe, but a poor representation of the tightness of classic Resident Evil's design. It's a shame. Jill is undeniably the cooler of the two. RE1 Chris is a far cry from his boulder punching peak, and Jill's outfit with that chic beret is rightfully iconic. Remake smartly balances the scales a bit. Chris now sports greater offense along with defense. His knife is both bigger and stronger than Jill's. His pistol shoots faster and scores critical headshots more often. He even runs slightly faster too. Now, both characters get a freebie personal item. Jill retains her lockpick and Chris now carries his lighter. You know, the one from that very serious cast introduction. If Jill wants to burn corpses, she'll need to give up 2 whole inventory slots for kerosene and the lighter. New self-defense items were also added, essentially get-out-of-jail-free cards that allow you to escape a zombie's clutches. Both can carry daggers, but only Chris gets the instant kill flash grenades. Jill's taser is fine, but it lacks that satisfying oomph. Don't you agree? Her campaign is still likely the easier overall. Those 8 inventory slots are hard to beat, but the gap has narrowed considerably. Remake also added explicit difficulty options on the main menu, divorced from character choice, so feel free to just pick which flavor you prefer, a combat focus with an illiterate or a strategic approach with a stylish hat. We've covered the evil, now let's turn our eyes to the residents, specifically the exemplary level design of one of gaming's most iconic settings. The Spencer Mansion is as much a character in the game as Chris or Jill, which is admittedly a low bar to clear. Each room has its own distinct identity, formed through unique layouts, camera angles, and mechanical function, but they all collectively still present as a cohesive whole. Remake's heightened fidelity further transforms the mansion into a real lived-in location, by cramming richer environmental storytelling and set dressing to even the most inconsequential nooks and crannies. Spend enough time in Resident Evil and you can practically walk the halls of the mansion in your mind. Exploration is very non-linear, with no short supply of backtracking, so a strong internal compass will serve players well. This particular brand of puzzle box level design is reminiscent of the classic Legend of Zelda dungeons or an interconnected Metroidvania map, which is to say, it speaks exactly to my gameplay preferences. I absolutely love the feeling of being lost in a labyrinthian space and the rewarding process of mastering its intricacies. Progression in this game is quite complex. You can never expect a simple point A to point B in Resident Evil. Instead, you are tasked with slowly unraveling a tangled sequence of roadblocks that gradually open up new sides to the mansion and inch you closer to the finish line. The appeal of this design is difficult to appreciate without experiencing it for yourself, but I'll do my best to illustrate how it works. Here we have the two main floors of the mansion. The game's first act sees players dropped into the lobby, from which they must make their way to the courtyard in the northeast corner of the map. A direct approach doesn't get you very far. You quickly run into one of countless locked doors, this one emblazoned with the symbol of a sword. Sword doors are naturally unlocked by the sword key, which is inconveniently hidden on the far end of the first floor. The obvious path is once again foiled by one-way doors that must be unlocked from the opposite side. The only way to reach this northwestern corner of the first floor is by taking a roundabout route through the second floor. Now this may seem trivial with an omniscient understanding of the map, complete with all lock and key locations, but remember that a new player is fumbling around blind. They have no idea which direction they should be heading in and no idea where the necessary keys are. Progress is only earned by meticulously exploring the space available, which I've helpfully shaded in for you. The sword key widens the field considerably, which is what makes Jill's progression feel so truncated. Her lockpicking kit completely bypasses all sword locks, and in my opinion does great harm to the gameplay loop by allowing for too much freedom during the opening. It's the complex pathing and satisfaction from overcoming obstacles that makes the Spencer Mansion so special after all. The remake smartly reins her in a bit and only allows her to bypass simple locks, which require an old key in Chris's campaign. You'll notice that the sword key alone allows players to reach the threshold of the courtyard exit, but escape is thwarted by a more complicated progression check. Rather than a single key, this door requires a collection of 4 elemental crests. More on that later. After combing through the expanded playspace, players will eventually make the connection between the hostile plants to the west and the chemical bag to the east. If this is too tricky for you, you can thank Capcom for renaming it in the remake to the, and I quote, chemical to use on plants. As obvious as this interaction is, remember that there is no indicator on the in-game map reminding players where those vines were once they've acquired the means to neutralize them. Observant players might be capable of recalling these points of interest, but many will find themselves retracing all their steps, dodging zombies along the way. What a seasoned speedrunner can accomplish in mere minutes might take a newcomer an hour or more. Plant 42 Jr. was guarding another themed key, the armor key. With even more of the mansion now opened, the cycle of exploration repeats. Swapping the gold emblem with the wood emblem in the dining room is a simple puzzle to obtain the shield key, but remember that the discovery of these two items is likely separated by several hours. The shield key only opens a single lock, the door to Yawn and the moon crest he guards. This crest, along with 3 others like it, are the keys to finally exiting the mansion through the courtyard. Players will have encountered a series of logic puzzles during their travels to this point. These must be solved to obtain the remaining crests. I don't know about you, but I've had bad experiences with point-and-click adventure-style puzzles. Thankfully, I didn't find any of Resident Evil's to be too frustrating. If you just slow down, taking the time to read the in-game documents and inspect key items, the solutions reveal themselves with minimal friction. Hopefully, I've made it clear that navigation is the more challenging puzzle anyway. To that end, even the original title included indispensable quality-of-life features to ease potential frustration. You are notified when keys have worn out their usefulness, and the in-game map indicates which doors have not yet been opened. The remake's map is even further enhanced by shading in the rooms that still hold undiscovered items. It wouldn't be elegant, but a truly stuck player could brute force their way through the game, by just clearing every room and trying every lock until they stumble into the path forward. The crests can be collected in any order, a merciful bit of flexibility that enables stumped players to revisit a tricky puzzle later on with a fresh mind. The non-linear progression in general is really interesting to study. For example, did you know it's possible to collect the armor key before the sword key? Fan randomizers and the Director's Cut's official Arrange mode lean into these routing quirks to great success. The outdoor courtyard is a nice breath of fresh air from the stifling mansion, and the subsequent guardhouse continues the satisfying lock and key progression pattern with some memorable puzzles and set pieces. Upon defeating Plant 42, players earn yet another mansion key, the helmet key, which clears most of those stubborn remaining locks from when we last left. A new basement level is even opened up with elevator and stair connections to the other floors. Returning to a more familiar area risks deflating that all-important tension, so the developers seize the opportunity to throw a new wrench into the player's plans. It doesn't matter if you've memorized zombie locations or even cleared the halls, because it's time to welcome a new resident to the building, the Hunter. Capable of beheading you in an instant, these guys are incredibly successful at reintroducing an element of surprise and sense of danger as you creep through the same halls yet again. Before we move into the final act, a quick word on REmake's expanded levels. They're exceptional. Okay, I guess I owe you a bit more explanation than that. The original Resident Evil is a relatively short experience. I take no issue with this, but it is. A first playthrough might land somewhere around 7 hours, whereas the remake nearly doubles that length. Some of that is due to a heavily shuffled progression path, but the real standout is the extent to which the classic locations themselves have grown. The mansion additions are very seamlessly integrated into the existing floor plan. They fit in perfectly to the point where it's difficult to distinguish between what was and wasn't present back in 1996. These renovations could easily feel tasteless or tacked on, but not even once is this the case. Several entirely new areas are just as impressive. The cemetery fills what was once an oddly empty space behind the mansion, tying the map together in a way that feels natural. More importantly, it brings with it a whole nother set of trinkets to collect as well as a new boss fight. That outdoor cabin I brought up earlier is a small inclusion on its own, but one that kicks off the surprisingly deep Lisa Trevor subplot, culminating in a chilling new subterranean altar level where she reckons with her lost humanity. Lisa was the daughter of the mansion's architect, George Trevor, and an early test subject for the progenitor virus. The tragic tale of this family, told in a series of diary entries, was cut at the last minute from the original game. It's really cool to see this idea come full circle. It adds a mournful sense of humanity to all the monsters we face. Most did nothing to deserve this horrible fate. I could go on and on about all that is new in the remake. There's a lot. But frankly, the results just speak for themselves. The confidence in building upon such a hallowed foundation is quite impressive. Every addition was clearly carefully considered, but it remains a staggering accomplishment that nearly every change served to make the experience even stronger. Both versions carry their heightened anxiety into the final act as you descend into the wholly unfamiliar underground tunnels. I find these especially disorienting to navigate, but not in a deliberate puzzle-like manner. With less distinct views and less defined rooms, the strong visual identity of the game seems to have taken a back seat. Instant death boulder traps are a unique wrinkle, but not one I especially appreciate either. Overall, the tunnels are my least favorite section of the game, but this is only a slight stumble in the grand scheme. The designers just set the bar so high with the Spencer Mansion that a comparably bland, corridor-heavy, linear design stands out. The final lab level fares better, but still falls short of the nearly flawless first half of the game. There's plenty of locks and keys, but the progression path never strives for the genius of Spencer's iconic puzzle box. The general sterility is once again a nice contrast to the dusty mansion, and the introduction of another new threat helps keep things fresh. The insect-like chimeras set themselves apart by their tendency to crawl about on the walls and ceilings, putting even the generous auto-aim to the test. I found the puzzles in the lab to be some of the most satisfying, and I really relished in the bits of Umbrella backstory uncovered in this lore-heavy location. Please don't take my brevity on these sections as any sort of condemnation. I just don't have as much to say about the design once we leave the mansion, And I think you're probably getting sick of my voice anyway. The game's ending is where things feel a bit rushed, but at least it makes time for Wesker's comeuppance.
That's right. This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant! Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
His hurt feelings after failing to impress Chris with his life's work is another unintentionally hilarious bit of RE1 writing. It only gets funnier with the context of future games and the incredible lengths he goes to get back at Chris for such a sick burn. Tyrant certainly looks the part. His reveal in the tank is pretty epic, but the final boss fight itself doesn't quite deliver on that promise. Essentially, you just have to dodge while waiting for the game to decide enough time has passed before giving you the rocket launcher to finish the job. A more dynamic arena or move pool might have helped, but combat was never the focus in Resident Evil. Any final boss was destined to be a disappointing cap to the adventure, because such a trope just doesn't play to the game's strengths. And that's a wrap on Resident Evil 1. Our heroes fly off to safety, the lab self-destructs in their wake, and the credits roll. As I posited up front, I believe the game and its trademark design philosophy has endured for 3 key reasons. Say them with me, all together now. Atmosphere, tension, and level design. Plenty of other games demonstrate strong command over 1 or 2 of these elements, but it's the combination of all 3 working together that elevates Resident Evil to that legendary pantheon of genre-defining games. The maze-like level design elevates the tension, which correspondingly reinforces the atmosphere, and you could rightfully say the same thing in reverse. The game is greater than the sum of its parts. Resident Evil set a rock-solid foundation for its own franchise, as well as the larger survival horror genre, but it has undeniably aged. Obviously, I still believe it holds up, but you do have to have a bit of patience with it today. Which brings me to the remake. This title is also ancient in gaming terms, 24 years old versus the original's 30 years, but has aged like a fine wine. Most of my discussion today focused on the 1996 release. It felt most appropriate to give the OG its flowers, but Remake deserves just as much praise for how honorably it carried on its predecessor's legacy. There have been recent rumblings about another RE1 remake in early development, and to that I say, good luck. We already have the perfect adaptation of Mikami's original vision, and we've had it since 2002. Although, I will admit I'd be all over a hypothetical remake. I've only recently become a big fan of the series, but I've loved just about every entry so far, and I'm always up for more. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit I experienced the modern remakes before the classic trilogy, though thus far I've really enjoyed reliving the originals too. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know. I'd love to continue with Resident Evil 2 if you guys want more. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the end. I really appreciate it. I'd be remiss to not also give a very special thank you for the generous support of my patrons, Axel Deeker, Andreas Schouten, and Stephen Tracy. Talk about going above and beyond. And with that, it's time for me to sign off. Until next time, take care.